Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be exploring the world of successful tech product development.
We're going to be digging deep into Marty Cagan's book, Inspired.
Yes. And I've also been looking at some summaries
Oh.
and a really interesting YouTube review to get some extra perspectives.
Yeah.
So the mission here, I think, is to really understand how the bests in the business,
Yeah.
companies like Google, Amazon, Netflix,
Mm-hmm.
how they build products
Right.
that users actually love and that achieve their business goals.
Exactly.
And I think one of the most fascinating things is this inconvenient truth
Yeah.
that something like 75%
Mm-hmm.
of product ideas actually fail.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be looking at how to embrace that reality and still come out on top.
Mm.
What do you think about that?
I think that's crucial because it's easy to get caught up in the hype and think that every idea is a winner.
Yeah.
But the reality is that most ideas are not good. And that's okay.
Yeah.
The key is to figure that out as quickly as possible.
And so I think like what really stood out to me in Inspired is how much emphasis Kagan puts on building the right team.
Absolutely.
Like this is all about teams, not just about brilliant individuals.
You can have the smartest people in the world, but if they're not working together effectively as a team, they're not going to be successful.
Right. Yeah. And he actually uses this very interesting analogy of a honeybee colony.
Oh, yeah. I love that analogy.
Tell me about that.
It's this idea of like a superorganism, right?
Yeah.
Where each bee has its own specific role, but they all work together in this incredibly coordinated way
Yeah.
to achieve this common goal.
Yeah.
And that's how we should be thinking about product teams.
So like how does that translate to a tech company?
So you've got your product managers, you've got your designers, you've got your engineers, your product marketers, and all of these different roles need to be working together seamlessly, just like those bees in the colony, to create something truly great.
And I think one thing that you mentioned earlier that's really important is that idea of empowerment.
Yeah.
Like these teams need to be empowered. They can't just be order takers.
Exactly. They need to have clear objectives and the autonomy to figure out how to achieve them.
It's not about micromanaging every step of the way.
No, it's about giving them the freedom to experiment, to take risks, to learn from their mistakes.
And then the other thing, too, is that shared passion, right? Like Kagan talks about needing missionaries, not mercenaries.
Oh, I love that phrase.
What does that mean to you?
That means you need people who are truly passionate about the product and its mission, not just clocking in and out.
Like they believe in what they're doing.
Exactly. They're invested in the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go above and beyond because they care.
And I think that's something we see in all the successful tech companies, right? Like the people who work there are not just there for a paycheck. They're there because they believe in what they're building.
Absolutely. They're changing the world in some way, and they're excited about it.
And it's that excitement, I think, that drives them to create those amazing products. So we've talked about empowerment. We've talked about passion. What else makes these teams really stand out?
I think another crucial element is that continuous learning mindset. These teams aren't afraid to experiment, to try new things, to pivot when necessary. They understand that product development is an iterative process.
Right.
And they're constantly seeking out new information and feedback to improve their product.
And it makes sense because the world is changing so fast, especially in the tech industry.
Absolutely.
What worked yesterday might not work today.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the idea of embracing risk, right?
Yes.
Kagan talks about how the best teams don't shy away from risk. They actually actively seek it out.
You have to.
And that seems counterintuitive at first, right?
It does.
Because you would think in product development, you want to minimize risk.
Sure. But if you're not taking any risks, you're probably not innovating.
Yeah. You're not pushing the boundary.
Exactly. You're playing it safe.
And then somebody else is going to come along and disrupt you.
Exactly.
So how do we find that sweet spot between being responsible and reckless?
That's where product discovery comes in. It's about validating your ideas before you invest a lot of time and resources into building them.
And that's something we're going to dig into a lot more in the next part of our deep dive. But I think for now, we've got a good foundation for understanding the power of these product teams.
Absolutely. We've talked about empowerment, shared passion, continuous learning, embracing risk. These are all critical ingredients.
And without those ingredients, you're probably not going to get that magical product that everybody loves.
It's unlikely.
Yeah.
You need all of those pieces to come together.
So we've talked about like the importance of the team, but what about the process itself? I feel there are so many misconceptions about how product development actually works.
Oh, yeah.
In the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kagan, inspired, tackles a few of those head on. One of the big ones is this idea of the traditional roadmap.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that like super rigid document that you have to start that says, these are all the features we have to ship and these are the dates we're going to ship them by.
Right, exactly.
He actually argues that clinging to a fixed roadmap like that can really stifle innovation.
Interesting.
So instead of just focusing on checking off features, strong product teams, they're obsessed with solving business problems and achieving measurable outcomes.
So it's not just about blindly following this predetermined path. It's about being flexible and adapting to new information.
Right. It's about outcomes over output.
Outcomes over output. Okay, I like that.
You know, think about it. Like if you were going on a road trip, would you use a map that didn't have any detours or account for like unexpected road closures?
Right.
You need to be able to adjust your route based on what you encounter along the way.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier with embracing risk.
Exactly. He actually encourages teams to actively seek out risk rather than just trying to avoid it at all costs.
You can't be afraid to fail.
And I can imagine for a lot of people that's a really scary thought, right?
Oh, absolutely. It goes against everything we're taught.
Yeah.
But if you're not taking any risks, you're probably not pushing the boundaries enough.
Right. So how do you balance that need to take risks with the need to be responsible and not just be reckless?
That's where product discovery comes in again. It's all about validating those ideas before you invest a ton of time and resources into building them.
So you don't want to jump in head first.
Exactly. Test those assumptions. Make sure you're solving a real problem for real people before you go building the whole thing.
So I love how Kagan frames this idea of a culture of high-integrity commitments.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
So it's about building a culture of trust and accountability where teams can actually commit to delivering on what they promise.
Yeah.
And they're held to a high standard, but it's also about giving them the space to do their best work. So it's not just about setting these arbitrary deadlines.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that those deadlines are meaningful.
Exactly.
And that everyone is bought in and aligned on what it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and that there's open communication. You know, teams feel comfortable raising concerns or challenges without being afraid of being punished for it.
This all makes so much sense, but I can imagine that it's not always easy to shift away from those traditional mindsets and embrace this more agile approach.
It definitely takes a conscious effort, and it often requires buy-in from leadership. You know, those at the top need to set the tone and create an environment where experimentation and learning are encouraged.
Absolutely, and I've seen it firsthand in companies where that leadership support is missing.
Yep.
It can be really tough to make that cultural shift.
Yeah, for sure. But when you do have that support and you create that culture of empowerment, the rewards can be huge.
So we've busted some myths about roadmaps and risk-taking. What other misconceptions does Kagan tackle in Inspired?
One that really resonated with me is this idea that product development is solely the responsibility of the product team.
You mean it's not just the product manager's job to come up with a brilliant idea and then tell everybody else what to build?
Exactly. Kagan stresses the importance of involving everyone in that discovery process. Engineers, designers, marketers, even customer support.
It's almost like that saying, 2 heads are better than one.
Right.
But in this case, it's like 10 heads are better than one.
Totally. And by involving everybody, you're creating that sense of shared ownership and accountability.
Yeah.
People are more likely to be invested in the success of the product if they've had a hand in shaping it.
So instead of having this siloed approach, where every team is kind of working in isolation, you're creating a more collaborative environment.
Exactly, where everybody's working towards that common goal.
And I think that's where that strong communication and alignment comes in.
Absolutely. Everybody needs to be on the same page about the product vision, the strategy, the goals.
And I imagine that could be a challenge, especially in larger companies.
Oh, for sure. But Kagan gives some really valuable insights into how to overcome those challenges and create that culture of product excellence.
Well, I'm definitely eager to hear more about those insights in the next part of our deep dive. Let's explore some of the specific techniques and strategies that Kagan recommends for building that winning product culture.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of teams, busted some myths, and even touched on product discovery, but how do we actually do product discovery effectively? Like, what are the steps?
Yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Exactly.
Kagan gives us this really great framework for thinking about risk and then some super clever techniques for actually tackling it.
Okay, let's start with risk. I know he talks about 4 major types.
Yeah, the 4 horsemen of product development.
Oh, I like that.
So we've got value risk, usability, risk feasibility risk, and business viability risk.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one. What exactly is value risk?
So value risk is all about making sure you're building something people actually want.
Will customers find it valuable enough to use it, let alone pay for it? Does it actually solve a real problem they have? If you haven't really nailed that value proposition, you're in trouble from the start.
Yeah, it makes sense. You could have the most beautifully designed, technically brilliant product in the world, but if it doesn't actually solve a problem for anyone, it's going to flop.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to test your assumptions about value early and often don't just assume, what people want. Go out and talk to them.
Okay, so value risk is all about desirability. What about usability?
So usability risk is all about making sure your product is easy and enjoyable to use. Can people figure out how it works intuitively? Is the design clear and user-friendly? Even if your product is valuable, if it's clunky or confusing, people are just going to abandon it.
Yeah, we've all been there, struggling with an app or website that just makes you want to tear your hair out. It's like no matter how good the underlying idea is, if the execution is painful, it's just not going to work.
Exactly. And the tricky thing about usability is that it's often subjective, right? What one person finds intuitive, another might find confusing. So it's crucial to actually conduct usability testing with real users to identify any potential pain points.
You got to get it out in the wild and see how people actually use it.
Exactly. Get that real-world feedback.
All right, so we've got value, we've got usability. What about feasibility?
So feasibility risk, that's all about the technical side of things. Can your team actually build what you're envisioning? Do you have the right technology, the right expertise? Is it going to be too expensive or time-consuming to develop?
So before you get too carried away with this brilliant idea, you need to make sure that it's actually achievable.
Exactly. You got to be realistic.
Within the constraints of your resources.
Exactly. It's no use dreaming up some product that requires technology that doesn't even exist yet.
Right.
Or that would take your team years to build.
Yeah.
So you got to be grounded in reality.
And then finally, we have business viability risk.
Right. So this is where you bring in the business lens. Does your product align with your overall business goals? Is it going to be profitable? Can you market and sell it effectively?
Right. You can have a product that's valuable, usable, and feasible, but if it doesn't actually make business sense, it's not going to be sustainable.
Exactly. It's like you can't make a good product without a good business.
Totally. So those are the four major risks: value, usability, feasibility, and business viability. And the key to successful product discovery is to identify and mitigate these risks as early as possible.
Absolutely. The earlier, the better.
So how do we actually do that? What are some of the techniques Cagan recommends?
So one of the most interesting techniques he talks about is the fake door test.
Oh, I've heard about this. It sounds kind of sneaky in a good way.
It is. It's so clever. It's this brilliant way to gauge demand for a feature before you've even built it.
Okay. How does it work?
So imagine you have this idea for a new feature on your website. Instead of building the whole thing, you create a simple fake door, like a button or a link, that looks like it leads to that feature. But when someone clicks on it, instead of launching the actual feature, they're taken to a landing page that explains it's coming soon.
Oh, I see.
And invites them to sign up for updates or provide feedback.
That's brilliant. You're essentially testing the waters.
Exactly.
Seeing if there's enough interest to justify building the whole thing.
Exactly. And you're getting valuable feedback from potential users before you've invested a ton of time and effort.
That's so smart. Are there any other techniques like that that can help us test our assumptions early on?
Oh, yeah. Kagan's a huge advocate for just getting out of the building and talking to real users.
Okay.
Conducting user interviews, observing people interacting with your product or a prototype, gathering qualitative feedback that can give you some incredible insights.
Yeah, I think that human element is so crucial. You can analyze data and run surveys all day long, but sometimes nothing beats actually sitting down with a user and hearing their thoughts and reactions firsthand.
It's so powerful. And it's not just about talking to users. It's about involving everyone in that discovery process. Engineers, designers, marketers, everyone should have a voice and contribute their perspectives.
So it's really about breaking down those silos and creating that truly collaborative culture where everyone is invested in building the best possible product.
Exactly. And when you have that kind of culture in place, combined with a solid understanding of risk and the tools to mitigate it, you're well on your way to building products that people love.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the power of teams to the importance of continuous learning and embracing risk to those really practical techniques of product discovery. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Yeah, I hope so. It's all about building those amazing products that people really love and that solve real problems.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and to our listeners, until next time, keep learning, keep building, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.